Imagine this, a man overwhelmed by betrayal decides to share his pain with the world, typing out his story late into the night. He turns to a community of strangers, hoping for advice, comfort, maybe even a way forward. His words are raw, honest, and desperate, a reflection of a broken heart and a shattered trust. But what happens when those words, intended as a cry for help, set off a chain of events that no one could have foreseen? A marriage already hanging by a thread unravels completely. The support he receives from thousands of faceless voices pushes him to take steps he never thought he'd take. Now consider this, those steps lead to an outcome so devastating, so beyond what anyone could imagine, that it leaves a permanent scar, not just on one family, but on everyone who hears the story. It's a tale that begins with a simple post, just a few hundred words shared on Reddit, and ends in a courtroom, a prison sentence, and lives irreparably changed. This is the story of a Reddit user, Jason in Hell. It's a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and consequences that shook an entire community. What started as an online confession turned into one of the most haunting cases ever to emerge from the digital world. Welcome to True Crime Files, where we unravel the most haunting and shocking true crime cases from around the world. In today's video, we'll explore the tragic events that began with a Reddit post and ended in a devastating family loss. If stories like this intrigue you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more. In the early months of 2019, a user on Reddit known by the name Jason in Hell created a post that would soon gain the attention of thousands. It was not a post filled with humor, entertainment, or even casual conversation. It was a cry for help, a digital confession from a man grappling with the destruction of his marriage. Jason began his post by detailing the discovery that had shattered his world. His wife, Brandi, had been unfaithful to him, engaging in an affair with a man more than twice her age, a 51-year-old neighbor who Jason described as someone he had once trusted. The betrayal wasn't just an emotional blow, it left him questioning everything about his life, his marriage, and even his own judgment. His words painted a picture of someone desperately trying to make sense of the chaos around him. He described the moments of suspicion that had built over time, the unexplained absences, the hushed phone calls, the subtle but undeniable shift in Brandi's behavior. Jason confessed that he had ignored his instincts for months, choosing to believe his wife's reassurances instead of confronting the growing unease in his mind. But eventually, the evidence became impossible to ignore. He discovered messages between Brandi and their neighbor, messages that were explicit and heartbreaking in their clarity. The truth was undeniable. The woman he loved had been living a double life, and their marriage was crumbling under the weight of her actions. Jason's post wasn't just a recounting of facts, it was raw, emotional, and deeply vulnerable. He spoke about the nights he spent awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he could have done differently. He described the crushing pain of realizing that the life he thought he was building had been a facade, a fragile illusion shattered by infidelity. But amidst the heartbreak, Jason's post also revealed a man determined to move forward. He wasn't just sharing his story to vent, he was seeking advice from the community. He asked for guidance on how to handle the situation, how to protect his children from the fallout, and how to rebuild his life after betrayal. He wanted to know if divorce was the right path, if custody battles were inevitable, and if there was any chance of finding peace in the aftermath of such a devastating discovery. The Reddit community responded in droves. Thousands of comments poured in, offering support, advice, and encouragement. Some users shared their own stories of infidelity and heartbreak, while others gave practical suggestions for navigating the legal and emotional challenges ahead. Jason was no longer alone. He had found a virtual community that was willing to stand by him during one of the darkest periods of his life. But what no one could predict at the time was how this simple post, written in a moment of despair, would set off a series of events that would lead to an unimaginable tragedy. Jason had turned to the internet for solace, but the path his life would take from that point forward was far from the resolution he had hoped for. The story was only beginning. When Jason's post hit Reddit, it was as if a floodgate had opened. Thousands of users from around the world came together to respond, each offering their own perspective, their own piece of advice, their own voice in the overwhelming wave of comments. Some messages were brief, a few words of encouragement, while others were long, detailed accounts of similar experiences, stories of heartbreak and survival shared by strangers who felt an undeniable connection to Jason's pain. Many users didn't hesitate to urge him to leave the relationship. They told him that trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. Others commended him for taking the brave step of seeking advice and reassured him that he wasn't alone. The comments were filled with phrases like, "You deserve better," "Focus on your kids," and "It's time to walk away from the pain." People who had never met Jason took on the role of confidants, allies, and guides, offering him a sense of community he likely hadn't felt in months. But not all the responses were emotional. Some users approached the situation with a practical mindset, giving Jason step-by-step advice on what to do next. "Document everything," one commenter advised, emphasizing the importance of being prepared for a potential custody battle. "Get a good lawyer," another user suggested, warning Jason that the legal system could be complicated and unforgiving. And then there were the parents in the community, those who had faced custody struggles themselves. They reminded Jason that, above all, his children needed him to be strong, stable, and focused. "Your kids are your priority now," one comment read. "Don't let the betrayal distract you from being the father they need." As Jason engaged with the replies, it became clear that he was listening. He thanked users for their advice, promised to take the necessary steps, and expressed his determination to protect his children from further harm. Yet, amidst the flood of support, there were also voices of caution. Some users urged him to think carefully before making any drastic decisions. "This isn't just about you and your wife," one commenter wrote. "Every action you take now will affect your kids for the rest of their lives." Did the community's overwhelming support give Jason the clarity he needed to move forward, or did the collective push to leave his marriage set off a chain of events that could never be undone? In moments like these, how much weight should we give to the advice of strangers? These are questions that linger, questions that grow heavier as we move further into this story. Following the overwhelming response to his Reddit post, Jason made a decision that many believed was the only path forward. He filed for divorce. It was a step he had contemplated with deep reluctance, torn between the hope of salvaging something from the wreckage of his marriage and the pressing need to protect himself and his children from further emotional harm. The community had been clear in their advice. This relationship, broken by betrayal, was not worth rebuilding. For Jason, it was not just about escaping the pain, it was about creating a new life, one built on stability and trust for the sake of his children. When the divorce papers were served, the response from Brandi was anything but expected. Initially, there was silence, an eerie quiet that Jason mistook for acceptance. But that calm was short-lived. Brandi's reaction began to surface in subtle ways. Angry phone calls, erratic behavior, and comments that left Jason uneasy. Despite everything that had happened, Jason still wanted to believe that Brandi would prioritize their children, Tyler and Charlie, above all else. He hoped she would navigate this process with the same focus on their well-being that he intended to uphold. But those hopes began to erode as Brandi's behavior grew more unpredictable. Conversations about custody, which should have been centered on the needs of the children, became confrontational. Brandi seemed to resist any notion that Jason could play a central role in their lives moving forward. Jason documented these interactions as advised by the Reddit community, meticulously keeping track of each encounter. Yet, even with these precautions, nothing could have prepared him for what would happen next. On a day that began like any other, Jason was blindsided by a call that would change his life forever. Brandi, in a desperate and incomprehensible act, had taken the lives of their two children, Tyler and Charlie. The news was incomprehensible, an act so unfathomable that it defied any sense of logic or humanity. She had chosen the most extreme way to keep Jason from gaining custody, robbing not only Jason, but herself of the two people who should have mattered most. As the details emerged, the weight of what had happened settled heavily on everyone who heard the story. It wasn't just the loss of two innocent lives, it was the shattering of a father's world, the destruction of a family, and the ripple effects of a tragedy that would extend far beyond Jason's life. The community that had once rallied around him now mourned with him, their collective voice silenced by the gravity of the events. Brandi's actions led to immediate legal repercussions. She was arrested and charged, her explanation for what she had done offering no comfort, no clarity, no answers. During her trial, the court heard testimonies that painted a picture of a woman overwhelmed by her circumstances, yet no justification could ever explain or excuse her actions. The jury's decision was swift, and Brandi was sentenced to 120 years in prison. For many, it felt like justice, but for Jason, no verdict could ever repair the loss he had endured. In the aftermath, Jason's story became a cautionary tale, a harrowing example of how the fallout from a single act of betrayal could cascade into unthinkable tragedy. For those who had followed his journey from the beginning, it was a sobering reminder of the fragility of the human condition and the unpredictable paths that heartache and desperation can lead to. The questions that emerged in the wake of this tragedy were complex and unanswerable. Could anything have been done to prevent this? Was there a moment, a decision that might have altered the course of events? And what role did the collective encouragement of strangers play in guiding Jason toward a decision that, though logical, had such devastating consequences? Jason himself has remained largely silent about the events, retreating from the public eye in search of a semblance of peace. His story, however, lives on, serving as a somber reflection on love, betrayal, and the lengths to which desperation can drive a person. It's a story that leaves no one untouched and raises questions that linger far longer than the words on a screen. Brandi's trial was swift, but the weight of what had occurred stretched far beyond the courtroom. In the eyes of the law, there was no room for ambiguity in her actions. The court heard the evidence, the testimonies, and the tragic timeline that led to that devastating day. The sentence was handed down. 120 years in prison. For many, it was justice delivered, but for Jason, it was a hollow victory. No punishment could ever bring back Tyler and Charlie. The sentence marked the end of a legal battle, but left behind an aftermath filled with unanswered questions. How does a community, let alone a father, process an event of this magnitude? Jason, who had sought advice and solace from strangers, now carried the burden of unimaginable loss. His story was no longer just his own. It had become a shared grief. Discussed in threads, forums, and articles across the internet, the Reddit community, which had once rallied around Jason with words of encouragement, now found itself grappling with the unintended consequences of their collective advice. Many questioned whether their support had played a role in the tragedy, even if indirectly. Could the push to leave, to fight for custody, have escalated an already fragile situation? Others argued that the blame lay solely with Brandi, whose actions defied reason and compassion. Beyond the personal tragedy, this case raised broader questions about the influence of online communities. When people share their most intimate struggles with strangers, what responsibility does the community bear in the advice it offers? The internet can be a powerful source of support, but it can also amplify emotions, create pressure, and unintentionally shape decisions. Jason's story forced many to confront the complexity of seeking help in a public space, where empathy and encouragement coexist with the potential for unintended consequences. For Jason, the aftermath was a journey of quiet survival. He withdrew from the platform where his story had first gained attention, choosing instead to grieve away from the public eye. Yet, his experience remains a haunting reminder of the fragility of human lives and the unforeseen impact of the digital age. This story is not just about one man's loss, it is about the delicate line between seeking help and facing the consequences of the choices that follow. It challenges us to think deeply about how we connect with others in moments of vulnerability, and what responsibility we carry when we offer advice, even with the best of intentions. As we reach the end of this story, it's impossible not to be left with questions that linger, questions that feel as heavy as the tragedy itself. What do we make of the role the Reddit community played in Jason's life? Was the advice he received the push he needed to make necessary changes? Or did it unknowingly set events into motion that could have been avoided? And what about the broader implications? When personal struggles are shared publicly, as Jason's were, how do we balance offering support with the understanding that our words may have unforeseen consequences? Can advice given in good faith ever truly account for the complexities of someone else's reality? This case also raises a deeper question: should stories like Jason's be shared at all? True crime cases such as this one carry an undeniable weight. They educate, they inform, but they also expose deeply personal tragedies to public scrutiny. Is there a line that should not be crossed? Or does shining a light on these events ultimately do more good than harm? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the advice Jason received on Reddit played a part in what happened? Or do you think Brandi's actions were entirely her own and unrelated to the advice he followed? Let us know in the comments. And what about sharing these cases online? Do you think discussing true crime stories helps raise awareness or simply adds to the pain of those involved? If you believe these stories have value, consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might want to join the conversation. Jason's story is one that will stay with us for a long time. It's a reminder of how deeply interconnected our actions and words can be, even when they come from behind a screen. It's also a call to think carefully about the power of the communities we build and the responsibilities we have to one another in moments of vulnerability. If you found this story thought-provoking or impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more cases like this one. Together, we can continue exploring the complex and often heartbreaking stories that shape the world around us.